Someone asks you what's wrong, and something in you just closes, not because you don't have an answer, you have plenty to say. But somewhere between your chest and your mouth, the words hit a wall, and what comes out instead is, "I'm fine." You said it as a kindness, both for them and for you, and yet you'll spend the rest of the night wondering why you couldn't just explain yourself when it actually mattered. If that's familiar, stick around, because there's a real psychological reason your brain chooses silence over explanation, and it has almost nothing to do with what most people assume. Here's the thing nobody tells you about going quiet. It isn't weakness, and it isn't coldness. It's a learned survival response, and once you see where it actually came from, the shame that usually comes with it starts to lose its grip. Let's start with what's actually happening in your body in that exact moment. Someone asks a real question. "What's wrong? Why are you upset? Talk to me." And instead of words showing up, you feel something closer to a shutdown. This isn't you choosing to withhold. This is your nervous system making a decision faster than your conscious mind can weigh in. And it's making that decision based on old information that might be years, sometimes decades, out of date. Psychologists call this response to emotional threat shutting down, or more clinically, a freeze response. The lesser talked about cousin of fight or flight. Most people know fight or flight. Almost nobody talks about freeze, even though it's just as common, especially in people who grew up in environments where speaking up didn't get them heard, it got them hurt, dismissed, or made things worse. If explaining yourself as a kid led to being talked over, punished, or told you were being too sensitive, your brain quietly filed that away as evidence. Explaining is dangerous. Silence is safer. And it doesn't matter how much time has passed since then, because your nervous system doesn't run on your calendar. It runs on pattern recognition, and once that pattern is set, it fires the same way in a completely different relationship, with a completely different person, who would probably listen just fine if you gave them the chance. Here's what makes this so confusing from the outside. To someone who didn't grow up with this wiring, silence looks like indifference, or worse, like manipulation. And they think you're punishing them or shutting them out on purpose, when really you're doing the opposite of what it looks like. You're not withholding to hurt them. You're protecting yourself from a version of vulnerability that used to cost you something real. The tragedy is that the people who need patience the most in that moment are often the ones getting the least of it, because their silence reads as rejection instead of what it actually is, self-preservation. If any part of this is landing, hit subscribe, because we're about to get into exactly why explaining yourself specifically, not just talking in general, feels like such a uniquely heavy lift for certain people, and it's not what you'd expect. Here's the layer underneath the freeze response. Explaining yourself requires something that talking in general doesn't. It requires trusting that the person on the other end will actually receive what you're handing them the way you meant it. You're not just producing words, you're taking something internal and private and translating it into language, then handing it to someone else and hoping they don't drop it, twist it, or use it against you later. That's an enormous amount of trust to extend in a single moment. And if you've ever had that trust broken before, even once in a way that really mattered, your brain remembers. It doesn't forget just because this new person seems safe. It runs the old calculation anyway, better safe than explained. There's also something quieter happening underneath this, something a lot of people don't say out loud, even to themselves. Sometimes staying silent isn't about fear of the other person's reaction at all. Sometimes it's because you genuinely don't have the words yet. Your feelings are real and enormous, but language is small and clumsy, and trying to compress something that big into a sentence feels almost dishonest, like you're shrinking something true into something that sounds smaller than it actually is. So silence becomes the more honest option, not because you're hiding, but because you're not willing to hand someone an inaccurate version of what's actually happening inside you. Here's something worth sitting with for a second. The people who go quiet the most under pressure are frequently the ones who feel things the deepest, not the ones who feel the least. Genuinely indifferent people don't struggle to explain themselves because there's nothing underneath demanding translation. If you're the one going silent, it's very often because there's too much underneath, not too little, and the silence isn't emptiness, it's overflow with nowhere approved to go. There's a specific pattern worth naming here too. A lot of people who default to silence had at least one important relationship growing up, where their explanations were met with an immediate rebuttal instead of curiosity. You'd start to explain why you were upset, and before you even finished the sentence, you were being corrected, argued with, or told you were wrong to feel that way in the first place. After enough rounds of that, most people stopped bothering to explain, not because they stopped having things to explain, but because explaining stopped being worth the cost. Silence became the more efficient option. No back and forth, no correction, no feeling smaller than you already did walking in. It's not that you don't want to be understood. It's that you calculated, probably without even realizing you were calculating, that attempting to be understood wasn't worth what it usually cost. There's a physical piece to this too that rarely gets mentioned. When you're in that shutdown state, actually forming words takes more effort than it does when you're calm, because the part of your brain responsible for language production shares real estate with the part responsible for emotional regulation, and under enough stress, the emotional system essentially takes priority and language gets deprioritized. This is why in the middle of a real emotional moment, you might genuinely struggle to find the words, even simple ones, even words you'd normally use without thinking. It's not that you're being difficult. Your brain is quite literally rerouting resources away from speech because its decided survival takes precedence over explanation, and it makes that decision without asking you first. So what actually helps here, because staying stuck in this pattern forever obviously isn't the goal. The first thing that matters more than people expect is timing. If someone asks you to explain yourself in the exact moment you're overwhelmed, that's almost never going to work, no matter how much you want to answer them. What works better is buying yourself room without disappearing entirely. Something as simple as, I want to explain this, I just need a few minutes to find the words, does something your nervous system actually needs. It signals to the other person that you're not shutting them out permanently, and it signals to your own body that you're allowed to wait until language actually shows up, instead of forcing it out half-formed under pressure. The second thing that helps is writing before speaking, especially for the conversations that matter most. If you know explaining out loud in real time tends to freeze you up, give yourself the option of writing it down first, even messily, even just for yourself, before you ever have to say it to another person. This takes the pressure off producing polished language in the moment and lets you access what you actually mean without the added stress of an audience watching you search for it live. The third thing, and probably the most important, is finding at least one relationship where you slowly test whether explaining is actually safe now. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to overshare with everyone. That's not the goal, and it's not healthy either. It means picking one person who has shown you through actual behavior over time that they don't punish honesty, and practicing small explanations with them first. Not the biggest thing you're carrying, something smaller. Let your nervous system collect new evidence slowly that explaining yourself doesn't always end the way it used to. That's ultimately the only thing that updates the old pattern, not willpower, not forcing yourself to talk more, just repeated proof that this time, with this person, it's actually different. If you've ever gone quiet in a moment you wished you could have explained yourself instead, drop a comment and tell me what usually happens right before you shut down. Because chances are a lot of people watching this recognize that exact moment. And if you want more of your own patterns explained like this, subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is here for. One last thing worth remembering, going silent doesn't mean you're broken, and it definitely doesn't mean you don't care. It means somewhere along the way, explaining yourself got connected to pain, and your brain built a system to keep that from happening again. That system did its job. It kept you safe when you needed it. The work now isn't tearing that system down, it's slowly, patiently teaching it that not every room you walk into is the one that taught it to go quiet in the first place. You're not incapable of explaining yourself. You're running an old protection system that hasn't caught up to the fact that some of the people in your life now would actually listen if you gave them the chance to.